Aloha, everybody, and welcome to our Mental Health Book Club for July. So this book for this month is Codependent No More, How to Stop Controlling Others and Start Caring for Yourself by Melody Beattie. And so here's what we're going to talk about today. So in this training, I'm going to teach you several different things. One of those things is really how to know if you are codependent, so that you can stop worrying about other people's needs and expectations and emotions and really start tuning into your own emotional experience so that you can put your needs first without feeling guilty. So that's the first thing. The second thing we're going to talk about is really like what I call the antidote to codependence, right? Which in this book, she talks about detachment as essentially the antidote to codependence, really so that you can release what I would say is sort of the illusion of control that we think we have when we're codependent on other people's behavior and reactions. And instead, again, shift the focus from what's out of your control, which is other people, to really shifting the focus to what is in your control, which is you. And then the last piece is we're going to learn about how to essentially shift from a codependent to more of an interdependent relationship so that you can let go of what's not serving you. And, whether that's past regrets or that's future fears or your sort of what I call anticipatory anxiety, that part of you that's constantly anticipating, what's coming in the future, and really live more in the present moment, right? Because that is what will actually improve the quality of your relationships and will enhance your connection with yourself and will also allow you to focus on your life and on your bigger purpose, right? So one of the things that I find is that when we are work with a lot of women, a lot of clients that are codependent. And what I see again and again, and I myself have experienced in past relationships, is that when we're codependent, we are so focused on the other person that it's almost like we lose ourselves in the process, right? And so I want to teach you guys, share a little bit about this book. We're going to debrief, talk about our reflection prompts. But my hope is that you'll walk away from this live understanding what codependence is, understanding what the signs are, and really understanding how to practice the art of detachment so that you can actually learn to focus more on what's in your control versus what's out of your control, which is going to give you such a greater sense of happiness and reduces anxiety and allows you to really live your life so that you are essentially stepping into like your highest self, right? Releasing what no longer serves you. So who am I to be sharing this with you, right? My name is Sarah Slater Snyder, and I'm a licensed therapist in Hawaii, also a registered yoga teacher and an elite embodiment coach. And, I've lived in Hawaii for about 20 years. I fell in love with this place when I moved here. It's truly an incredible place to live. And I worked as a high school counselor for 12 years. I started my private practice 3 years ago, and I've been running girls and women's circles for over a decade. And in 2021, I founded the Women's Wellness Circle, and I founded my life-changing Abounding Woman program in 2022. And what I've seen, through my 15 plus years in the mental health and education and wellness field is really just like I've come to honestly realize, appreciate the power of integrating the three things that I love: neuroscience, psychology, and yoga, and blending those really to align body, mind, and spirit in a really innovative and powerful way. Because ultimately what I want is to be able to help more women and more girls to step into their power, right? And to ultimately, as I was saying, I've worked with so many girls and women over the years, and I've taught them how to overcome codependence through stepping into their power, through speaking their truth without the guilt, without the shame, without worrying about other people's expectations of them or perceptions of them, right? And we do this through my embodied paradise methodology, which I'll share about at the end of this live. One thing I wanted to mention though is the more that you are able to engage today. So one of our members in our Women's Wellness Circle, had a great idea. She had an extra copy of Codependent No More. And so whoever is, commenting, engaging the most today, we're actually going to send you a free copy of this book, Codependent No More. So please, feel free to share anything that stands out to you, any aha moments you have as you're listening to this live today. And maybe you will win this free copy of the book. So I want to start by just talking about, what is the definition of codependency? That was our first reflection prompt. And really, like, I define codependency, the simplest way is caring too much, loving too much, right? But from in a sort of more from a psychology perspective, we would say it's really like a learned emotional and behavioral tendency where we feel this like excessive dependence on another person. We feel responsible for the other person's feelings and their actions, right? Or their reactions sometimes. And so there's so many different definitions. And actually, I love that in this book, Melody Beattie, the author, she shares a whole host of different definitions of codependence. She says a codependent person is one who basically has let another person's behavior affect him or her. And she says, who is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. And this, I'll be honest, was a really big aha moment for me in reading this book, because she's talking about the fact that in a codependent relationship, we're so focused on the other person, we find ourselves often anticipating, like I was talking about, this anticipatory anxiety, right? Where we're constantly anticipating, how are they going to react to me? You might call this like walking on eggshells, right? We're constantly like trying to figure out, what do I need to say? What do I need to do so that the other person doesn't react poorly to me, or so that they like me? Often when we're codependent, we find that we're also people pleasing constantly, right? And what struck me about, one of the things she talks about is that this anticipatory anxiety that we have is coming from a place of wanting to be in control, or thinking we are in control of another person's emotional reactions or their emotional state or their behavior. But really, we never have control over anyone other than ourselves, right? So I'm going to read a couple quotes by Melody Beattie because I think they're really powerful. She says, codependency is many things. It's a dependency on people, on their moods, their behavior, their sickness, their well-being, and their love. She calls it a paradoxical dependency. She says codependents appear to be dependent on, but really they are dependent. They look strong, but they feel helpless. They appear controlling, but in reality are controlled themselves, sometimes by an illness. So she talks about the illness of alcoholism, and she is a big proponent of the 12-step method, which I can share a little bit about later. So, definitely in this book, there are elements of it where she does talk a lot about the 12-step program, and which is what they use in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And she also, she talks a lot about sort of her, reliance on like a higher power, her belief in God, essentially. So I always tell people, read this book because it's really life changing, but just take the parts that work for you and leave what doesn't work for you, right? So, and gosh, this really stood out to me too. She says, codependence is what happens when a child is not allowed to feel or express their genuine feelings and then grows up never learning how, right? And that rang true for me because, really, like, I myself was very codependent, and I never really understood why. Like, where did that come from? It took me many years of therapy to be able to fully understand where that was coming from, right? And sometimes, as in a family, like my family had so much love in there, but we didn't have a lot of boundaries, right? There was almost like this over loving, over giving, and I thought that was normal. And so often I felt like I didn't necessarily want to speak up for myself, or always voice my true feelings. Not necessarily because I felt like I wouldn't be heard. I always actually felt heard and supported in my family, but I didn't want to upset anyone in my family, right? And so that people pleasing part of me definitely sort of played out. So she also says codependence is when a person forfeits their needs, either because they're too focused on others or because they simply don't know what their needs are. And this is something I see time and time again, is that because a codependent person, often my clients, are so focused on whoever it is that they're in relationship with, and wherever that codependency is, they're so focused on the other person's needs, they're not even tuned into their own needs. So she actually says codependence is an addiction. It's a person depending upon another person because they're not depending on themselves. And I know that may sound a little harsh, but that's actually very true, right? And like sometimes we need that reality check that we are dependent on this other person, or relying on them for our emotional sort of needs, or even thinking that we need to be caretaking them and fixing them and, right, like playing the role of sort of peacemaker with them. But it's because we haven't fully learned that we can depend on ourselves, that we can speak our truth, that who we are is enough, right? We're often feeling like we have to do more to earn someone else's love or affection. And so there's many signs of a codependent person. And I would love to hear, those of you guys who are watching, if any of these resonate with you, you can just say, oh, that's me. Yep, true. But just kind of keep tally as I go through. So our second reflection prompt is, what are the signs of a codependent person, right? So, and there's a lot. So we'll say codependents often, right, here we go, feel responsible for other people's needs, feelings, thoughts, behavior, and well-being. That's a big one. Another sign or sort of symptom of codependence is that a codependent often feels almost forced to help other people, regardless of whether they actually want to help or not, right? We feel almost like it's our obligation, it's our duty to help other people, because that's sort of the dynamic or the belief that we've been raised with. So along those same lines, codependents often say yes when they really mean no. And sometimes that means doing things that they don't want to do because they believe that they're supposed to do them, right? And I know that was me for a very long time, is often saying yes when really I meant no. And that was true because I didn't yet know how to set healthy boundaries in my life. So codependents also sometimes don't know, I mentioned this, don't know what they want or what they need, because again, they're so focused on the other person's needs rather than their own needs. And sometimes they even feel like their needs are unimportant, right? So maybe often codependents believe it's selfish of me to take care of me. Like putting my needs first is selfish. No, it's not. Like that's a huge mindset shift that I work with my clients on, is that it's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's actually incredibly healthy and necessary for you to practice self-care. Codependents often try to please others instead of themselves, right? There's that people pleasing part of us, which actually I just again want to say that's a trauma response. That people pleasing is like actually a trauma response. When we feel like we have to put other people's needs before our own, it's because somewhere along the way we learned it wasn't necessarily safe, whether it's emotionally or physically, to put our needs first. We learned that in order to survive, we had to put other people's needs first. Codependents often feel safest when giving, and they are attracted to needy people often, which I know was true for me. I, growing up, absolutely felt safest when I was giving or over giving, and definitely found myself in these relationships where I was with a partner who was especially needy. And I played the role of the caretaker, right? Oh, Kizzy, thanks for commenting. Kizzy said they will tell you that it is the people you take care of. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so here's a couple more. Thank you for sharing that, Kizzy. Okay, so some more signs of codependence. So often codependents blame others for their feelings and struggles, sometimes because they don't fully understand what's going on internally within them. Sometimes codependents come from sort of a troubled or dysfunctional or repressed family. Sometimes codependents have low self-worth, and even sometimes that borders on like self-hatred, right? So again, it's like some of that comes from just really not being tuned into themselves. They're often like always scanning sort of their environment to basically assess, am I safe? Am I emotionally safe? Am I physically safe, right? And so often it's like we're so tuned into everyone around us, all of our energy is going outward instead of inward. And so that's a big shift too that I work with my clients on, is to basically like rein the energy in, right? Rather than putting all that energy out towards other people, always like assessing and tuning into other people's, subtle sort of cues and emotions and needs, right? Where we shift that and we turn it back to ourselves. Codependents often feel overwhelmed with guilt and shame. And I want to just make a distinction here. This doesn't come from Melody Beattie, but I see this a lot, right? The guilt is a super common, and shame is a super common experience of someone who is codependent. And Brene Brown distinguishes that not codependent, sorry, that guilt, an example of guilt is I did something bad, whereas shame is the belief I am bad. So shame like takes it to a whole new level. And neither one are really healthy, but if I had to pick between guilt and shame, I would say guilt might be a little bit healthier in that we are feeling at least like, a behavior was bad or a mistake as opposed to our character, which is more shame based, right? So ideally, we want to release the guilt, we want to release the shame, and I'll talk about how we do that, how we get to that place. But I just wanted to mention that distinction there. Codependents also often appear very rigid and controlled. Generally, it's because they're putting so much energy and attention into showing up in the ways that they believe other people want to see them show up, that like they don't have much energy left for checking in with themselves, because again, it's like all that energy is going outward, paying attention to all these other people around them, or their partner or their whoever it is, as opposed to, again, being focused on themselves and their emotional needs. So sometimes codependents get their artificial feelings of self-worth from helping other people, right? That's why so many individuals who are sometimes counselors, actually being in a helping profession, or nurses or doctors, or often, there's a high level of codependence in those professions, because, we found a way to be helpful to other people, essentially. But if that is like our sole basis of self-worth, that's not so healthy, right? So like we got to check that. Okay, so a few more. So what we see is that codependents often are sort of worrying excessively over minor things, like really, again, just so tuned into the most subtle, nuanced responses of other people, often to the point that they're like losing sleep, like they're just sort of like replaying scenarios in their minds, thinking about how can I respond differently or better. Sometimes going to really extreme lengths, actually, to control other people or their reactions, other people's behavior. So for example, this may look like, especially if we're talking about, a relationship with an alcoholic, it may look like to the point of like flushing alcohol, flushing the drugs, forcing therapy on their partner, right? When really, like, that is up to that person to choose whether or not they want to engage in therapy, whether or not they are ready to, get rid of the substance in their life. So codependents sometimes also try to control, like I was talking about control, right? Try to control events and people through, and this is where it gets not so healthy again, is through guilt, through coercion, through threats, advice giving, manipulation, helplessness, domination. There's all kinds of ways for the codependent to essentially try to manipulate the other person and get them to like essentially, it's part of that wanting to feel a sense of control, wanting to feel like I can predict how this other person is going to respond, when in reality we can never predict how another person's going to respond. Sometimes that even results in us pretending, as a codependent, pretending that circumstances aren't as bad as they actually are, like living in a place a little bit of denial. Sometimes that looks like, not taking time to actually see if other people are good enough for us. So sometimes that looks like settling in relationships that are not healthy. Sometimes that looks like being desperate, almost like desperately seeking love and approval, often from people who are incapable of providing it. And I know that was my experience, was being in a lot of unhealthy relationships with people who were emotionally unavailable. And I kept, looking for these ways in which maybe this person could show up in the way that I needed, but they didn't have that capacity. So a big, again, like just this shift is learning to see who is in front of you as opposed to who you want to be in front of you. Like rather than looking at this person that you're in a relationship with and, sticking with them because you have this belief of like, oh, but I know that they're capable, or, oh, but I really believe that they can do better. No, like see the behaviors that are actually in front of you. That's who they are, right? That is who they are. So sometimes codependents latch onto whatever or whoever they think can provide happiness, right? So again, it's like staying in that unhealthy relationship, even though part of us knows it's not healthy. Codependents also struggle with setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. I just did a whole training on setting unapologetic boundaries last week, so definitely feel free to check that out. I can drop the link in the comments after the live. Codependents also don't say what they mean. Sometimes they say only what they think the other person wants to hear, right? And then the last one is that often the codependent feels controlled by other people's emotions, especially anger. So this is, again, that part of us that's like wanting to prevent, wanting to people please because we don't want to deal with another person's anger. We don't believe that we can tolerate another person's anger. So like a huge shift that I, work with my clients on is, and we'll talk about how do we like shift out of these codependent patterns in a minute, but just since I'm on this topic, it's the subtle shift of essentially learning to let go of what we believe the other person wants us to, like how they want us to respond, and just allowing yourself to respond however you want, regardless of how that person reacts, right? So part of the shift is, can you learn to tolerate another person's discomfort rather than feeling like you have to people please and, say something so that, or do something so that they're not angry. It's allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to just be you, to respond however you want to respond, to say what is coming that's true for you, and to do what is true for you. And however that person responds, it's seeing what's theirs is theirs and what's yours is yours. So it's separating. There's an individuation that happens when we shift out of the codependent patterns, where we stop feeling responsible for their reactions and emotions. So that's a big one. And I gave this little quiz last time in my the live that was on unapologetic boundary setting, but I think it's worth just doing it quickly again. There's just 10 questions. And so really, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, am I codependent? So here's my little 10 question quiz. True or false? Are you codependent, and do you need healthier boundaries, right? This is in my Path to Paradise workbook. So 10 quick questions, true or false. Just jot them down as you go. Number 1, I give more weight to others' feelings than to my own. True or false? Number 2, I frequently say yes when other people ask me for help. So number 1, again, I give more weight to others' feelings than to my own. Number 2, I frequently say yes when other people ask me for help. It's like being a yes woman, right? Number 3, I often feel responsible for other people's emotions and or reactions. True or false? Number 4, I have a hard time expressing my needs to others. Right? True or false? Number 5, I struggle with being alone. Right? That's a big one. True or false? Number 6, I tend to be a fixer, peacemaker, or people pleaser in my relationships. True or false? Number 7, I sometimes wonder why my relationships feel so one-sided. That's another big one. Number 8, I am more of a giver than a receiver. I can't tell you how common that one is, actually. And a huge, huge thing that I work with women on within my programs and my one-to-one work with my wellness clients is practicing receiving, allowing yourself to receive, because sometimes we're so used to being the giver that we don't even like know how to receive compliments. We don't even know how to receive from other people. Okay, number 9, I struggle to make difficult decisions. True or false? And number 10, when a relationship becomes overwhelming or confusing, it is difficult for me to remove myself from it. I'll read that one again. When a relationship becomes overwhelming or confusing, it's difficult for me to remove myself from it. So I'd love to hear how you scored on this, right? So out of 10, how many did you say true to? So feel free to drop that in the comments, whether you're watching this live or you're catching the replay. I would say if you are finding yourself with like at least 3 truths or more, then you likely are codependent and you need to work on setting healthier boundaries. I know for me, when I took this quiz, I created this quiz, but back when I was like learning about codependence and I was trying to understand, I would have scored like for sure, like 10 out of 10 was me. Kizzy, thanks for sharing. More than 5. Yeah. And that's so common, right? Because all of these, they all go together. And, so our third reflection prompt is I want you guys to take a moment to just reflect and think about who in your life do you worry about? Who in your life do you wish that you could change? Because often when we're codependent, we believe that we can help other people. We believe that we can fix them and make their life better and, change them and help them get on a better path. And to be honest, this is the dynamic that plays out truthfully when in all codependent relationships, but certainly and especially when there is addiction or alcoholism present, right? That is why in this book, she talks so much about 12-step programs, is because um, with an addict or an alcoholic, the family members are constantly, it's like being on this emotional roller coaster, right? Because it's like you want your family member or your partner to get better and to be healthy and happy and not need the substance. But that's not how addiction or alcoholism works, right? And so for me, one of the most like life-changing experiences for me, and this took a lot of humility and a lot of courage for me to go, but was actually going to Al-Anon meetings. So AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is for individuals that are addicts or alcoholics. Al-Anon is for family members, and it exists all across the country. And it is I found it to be incredibly helpful just to hear from other people. And this was, again, I went to Al-Anon, I don't know, 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, went back when I was in some really unhealthy relationships with individuals that are addicts, that were addicts and alcoholics. And it was so powerful for me to understand that it wasn't up to me to fix my partner. It wasn't up to me to change him at that time. What helped me was to shift the focus from him back to me, right? Yeah. So Kizzy, thanks for sharing that. You said you've learned that you can't, and you're practicing trying to not fix or control other people. Yeah, every day, and you're getting better at it. You totally are, by the way. I'm so happy that you're sharing that, and it takes time, and it absolutely helps to be surrounded by other people who are similarly working on their own sort of their codependent tendencies. And so, I really encourage you, you don't have to go to Al-Anon to do that, but like so much of what I've tried to create here within our women's wellness circle, within my Abounding Woman program, is really just a safe space so that you don't feel alone in, you're moving through your own sort of healing journey, right? Like learning how to stand on your own 2 feet and to, build your sense of self-worth so that you are not relying on another person or dependent on another person's moods or emotions or responses. And instead, it's about you. Like, this is your story, your life, right? It's not about the other person. But that took me years and years and years to get to a place where I finally was able to like fully embrace that. So I want to talk a little bit about like, how do we do that? How do we make that shift, right? So the first thing I want to talk about before I share about detachment is our fourth prompt, which is, what is the difference between a codependent relationship and an interdependent relationship? So we've talked about codependence and what that looks like. But again, I just want to say that with a codependent relationship, it is 100% like your sense of self-worth and your sense of self-esteem comes from outside of yourself in a codependent relationship, right? Because we're constantly like looking to the partner, looking to our family, looking to whoever we're in that relationship with to give us validation, to give us attention, to give us love. That's why we people please. That's why we do what we do, right? So we neglect our own needs in a codependent relationship, and our sort of emotional experience, our mood is really governed by the other person. In an interdependent, healthy relationship, right? It's like where two autonomous people come together, right? So these two people that are living separate lives, who are making a choice to live those separate lives, but they come together and they share. And whether, again, if we're talking about a partnership, you're a couple, but you're able to separate. You're able to go your separate ways. You also find sort of personal fulfillment, each of you, in your own experience, your own interests, your own accomplishments, not just within the relationship. And a big piece of that interdependence is loving and supporting each other while respecting each other's boundaries, right? So in a healthy interdependent relationship, we can state our boundaries really clearly with our partner and they are heard, they are respected, right? That is a big, big shift. So in an interdependent relationship, both partners are like actively listening to each other and accepting who the other person is rather than trying to change them or rescue them or fix them. That's codependence, right? In an interdependent relationship, we have these healthy boundaries. We can say no without worrying about hurting another person's feelings. Whereas in a codependent relationship, we rarely say no because we feel like if we say no, we're going to offend them, we're going to hurt them. So there's just this like lack of emotional boundaries. Again, in an interdependent relationship, we're honest, we're open, we're not hiding our feelings or our actions from our partner. We're being completely just transparent, right? We're not trying to people please or keep the peace like we would in a codependent relationship. In an interdependent relationship, we make time for our own personal life and personal interests, right? We actually allow ourselves to like spend time apart intentionally. That is healthy in a relationship, right? As opposed to in a codependent relationship, we might be fearful of being abandoned or being alone and having difficulty being alone. In an interdependent relationship, we embrace our aloneness, right? And that is a huge thing that I teach my clients is how to be with themselves, how to practice radical self-love and to actually embrace that aloneness with yourself. So again, within that, being in an interdependent relationship is so different from codependence because in codependence, we feel responsible for our partner's happiness. We allow our moods to be like controlled by other people. In an interdependent relationship, we take responsibility for our own emotions, for our own behaviors. There's way more accountability by each partner for themselves, right? And each person's self-worth comes from within them, as opposed to looking to their partner for that validation, for that attention, for that love, right? Like I have to tell you guys, to be honest, like one of the most life-changing experiences for me was doing my yoga teacher training back in 2012. And part of why that was so significant because I started meditating every single day during this program. The big shift for me was realizing that all the love that I was looking for was already within me. It was right here all along. I was looking for it externally, right? Like I was like going from partner to partner, looking for this love and looking for this validation, but it wasn't there. I was constantly disappointed. And that's why I ended up in these really unhealthy codependent relationships. But once I figured out that actually it was here, I just had to learn how to tap into it, right? That was like game changing for me. I stopped needing essentially those relationships with other people and that validation from other people because I could give that to myself. So again, it's like in an interdependent, healthy relationship, we embrace change as part of our growth and evolution, as opposed to when we're codependent, we like fear change. We have difficulty adjusting to change. Quick story, like I can't even talk about this without sharing with you guys. So I don't even know what year this was, but I remember taking a trip to Maui and doing the road to Hana, which is this beautiful, like windy road that goes to this totally like really private, small little town. And you're driving along, there's all these waterfalls. And I did this with my mom and with one of my close friends at the time. And again, this was maybe like 12 years ago. I don't know. But I was getting out of a really unhealthy relationship at the time and fearful, so fearful of getting out of that relationship and like what was next. And it felt so uncertain and so unknown. And I was just terrified. And literally, we like rounded a corner and there was a tree with a license plate attached, like hammered into the tree. And the license plate said change in huge letters. And I literally like, we pulled the car over and I took a picture and I just like, it brings me to tears telling the story. And I burst into tears because it was so powerful for me to realize that like change is okay. Change is actually healthy. It's normal. It's part of growth. It's part of our evolution, you know? And to be honest, that change for me, like exiting that unhealthy relationship was truly one of like the most empowering and one of the most liberating experiences of my whole life. Like changed everything for me. So I just want to share that as like, you know, if you're watching this and you know that you yourself are in an unhealthy relationship, or you know that there's elements of codependence present, it doesn't have to stay that way. Like there's so much hope for you. You know, it's just a matter of building your own awareness, building your own sense of self-worth and self-esteem, and really getting yourself to a place where you feel ready to speak your truth and surround yourself with conscious company who can support you on this journey. I want to come back to this book for a moment, just to share a little bit more, because one of the things that I love that Melody Beattie talks about in this book and around overcoming codependence. So she says, a codependent person, again, is one who has let another person's behavior affect him or her, and who is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. She says the only person you can now or ever change is yourself. The only person that it's your business to control is yourself. And she says the formula is simple, right? Like, how do we do this? The formula is so simple. In any given situation, detach and ask, what do I need to take care of myself? It's that simple. That is detachment. So she says detachment involves present moment living in the here and now. We allow life to happen instead of forcing and trying to control it. We relinquish our regrets over the past and fears about the future. We make the most of each day. She says the rewards from detachment are great, right? Serenity, a deep sense of peace, the ability to give and receive love in self-enhancing and energizing ways. The freedom to find real solutions to our problems. We find the freedom to live our own lives without excessive feelings of guilt about or responsibility toward other people. That was so huge. Like, that honestly is just, I found, for me, detachment was 100% the key. And it was terrifying. I'll be honest. Like, I absolutely will own my own issues with control. And so detachment was very challenging for me. But I'll tell you what I figured out was that grasping, trying to hold on to this relationship that was so not healthy, or trying to hold on to whatever I thought I had control over, was actually so much harder and so much more exhausting than just letting go. Like, surrender and learning how to release control, learning how to practice present moment awareness, right? Because that's what detachment is. It's really like it's detaching from a person or a problem, but it's doing it from a place of love, not fear, right? So detachment doesn't have to be cold turkey, shutting off, right, from any connection. Sometimes if it's an unhealthy, abusive relationship, that's necessary. But really, like, detachment is a matter of like mentally, emotionally, and sometimes physically disengaging ourselves from those unhealthy kind of entanglements, right? She says detachment is based on the premise that each person is responsible for himself and that we can't solve problems that are not ours to solve, and that worrying doesn't help, right? So this is important. She says, when we detach, we allow people to face the consequences of their actions, to lie in the bed that they made, to be who they are, and to bear the responsibility of their own growth. And notably, we give ourselves the same freedom. And I might cry again as I talk about this, but I'll just be really honest that, like, for me, really embracing detachment meant leaving a relationship with someone who it was very unhealthy, but I still loved him, knowing that he may not survive, knowing that, and I'll be really honest, he didn't. So, you know, the person that I was with actually ended up many years later dying of an overdose. And I can't even tell you guys, like, had I stayed in that relationship, it would have been so much harder. I mean, I released myself from that relationship. I surrendered, I detached. And had I not done that, I would have found myself just in such grief, because I couldn't have predicted that was what was going to happen. But detachment truly means acceptance, right? It means release. It means surrender. And it took me many years, don't get me wrong, to like fully detach. But what was key was like realizing detachment doesn't mean that we don't care. It's actually just the opposite. The most loving thing that I could do with that relationship was to separate, because it wasn't healthy for me and it wasn't healthy for him, and just to let go. So she says detaching means that we intentionally work out what we can change and what we can't. And then we sit in that. We do what we can and we have peace when we can't. And like for me, that was what Al-Anon taught me. Was they have a saying, sort of, let, what is it? Let go and let God, which basically means like I don't know what your beliefs are if you're watching this, but for me, it was like, allow yourself to release it, let go, and just trust in God, trust in the universe, whatever you want to call it, but trust that whatever is meant to happen will happen, but you don't have control over that, right? So it's like allowing. It's such a different energy than this like rigid needing to be in control. So Melody Beattie lays out sort of some guidelines for learning how to detach. So, again, I mentioned sort of her first step is asking yourself, what do I need to take care of myself? The second step, she says, is learning to recognize when you are reacting and when you are giving away your control to another person, which is huge, right? Because sometimes it's that like back and forth, one person reacts and then the other person overreacts. And then it's just like this, we're like escalating the situation. So realizing when taking ownership over yourself is what she's suggesting, realizing and recognizing when you are reacting and giving away your control. And then step three, she says, make yourself comfortable, step away either mentally or physically, and actively do something to restore your sense of peace, right? So whatever that is for you, take yourself to the ocean, take yourself for a walk, right? Do something that brings you joy. The fourth step, she says, is assessing the situation honestly and doing it with compassion. So sometimes that means talking it out with a friend or a professional, finding somebody who you can really be honest with and talk through whatever is coming up for you. And then she says the last step in terms of detachment is establishing what you need to do now. So whether that's apologize, set boundaries, let someone or something go, right? But she's basically saying, don't tackle what you need to do until you've really allowed yourself to like own your part, own your behavior, realize like the role that you're playing in this codependent relationship and take ownership over that. Then you can start to think about, okay, what do I need to do next, right? So this was a lot. It's a lot of information I just shared with you guys. I hope it's been helpful. If you enjoyed this, if you found this useful, please, I'd love to hear like anything that stood out to you, any aha moments, anything that resonated. Please feel free to share that in the comments. Again, whoever engages and comments and shares the most will get yourself a free copy of this book, thanks to one of our fabulous Women's Wellness Circle members who has an extra copy. I wanted to just mention before I wrap up here, so if you enjoyed this, I want to just share with you that you will love what I'm teaching with my embodied paradise methodology, right? Like what this is, this integration of neuroscience and psychology and yoga is I really feel strongly about helping high performing women who are feeling mentally exhausted, whether it's due to codependence, often it is, but teaching women how to tune out all the external chaos and essentially stop needing that external validation so that you can tune into yourself, so that you can embody your highest potential and your health and a sense of balance, really, and so that you can live a more self-actualized and meaningful and fulfilling life. So if that is something you want to learn more about, I wish I had time to go through actually the steps of my embodied paradise methodology. I have a client in 2 minutes, so I probably should end this live. But I just want to share that again, what I am teaching, I feel very passionate about. There are so many ways to work with me. And I just would be more than honored to hop on a call with you if this resonates, if you want more support on your journey, if you want to learn a little bit more about what is this embodied paradise method that you're talking about, Sarah, just drop the word elite below, right? And last thing is, you're welcome, Kinsey, is, what is this whole elite embodiment thing? Really, I just want to share elite embodiment is about stepping into your highest self. It's about stepping into really your truest, most sort of connected version of yourself, your highest version, your most elite version of yourself. And that is really, like, to be honest, that is the journey that I've been on, was moving towards my highest self and getting to a place where I feel like I'm really living my potential. And that's what I want to help other women to do. So if that interests you, drop the word elite. I will reach out to you and privately we can connect. And I'll just share with you a little bit about how this process works and some ways that I can support you in releasing your codependent patterns and just helping you to sort of elevate into the elite version of yourself. So thank you guys so much for watching. I just love also seeing so many of you who I love and also who I know are have been big supporters for me over the years. So I just thank you and I honor you guys and hope to connect with you soon. Definitely, again, drop what has resonated from this live. I would love to hear. Okay, everyone, take care. Happy Aloha Friday.